It started with a girl who always believed that being quiet was the same as being good. She never asked for too much, never spoke when she was hurt, and always convinced herself that patience was the same as strength. In every room she entered, she made herself smaller, not because she had to, but because she thought that was how she would be loved. People around her noticed this early, and slowly they began to treat her like someone who would always stay no matter how little she received in return. At work, she was the one who stayed late without being asked, fixing mistakes that were never appreciated, while others got praised for doing less. At home, she was the one who listened more than she was listened to, gave more than she ever received, and smiled even when she felt invisible. But what she didn't know was that every time she accepted less, she was teaching the world her value without saying a single word. And the moment she thought this was just life and not a problem, something began to shift quietly in ways she could not yet see. It began with small changes that she ignored at first because she didn't think they mattered. A message left unanswered that used to get instant replies, a thank you that slowly disappeared from the things she did, and a presence that people started assuming would always be available. She told herself that people were just busy, that life was complicated, and that her feelings were probably an overreaction. But deep inside, something uncomfortable was growing, something she refused to name. The more she gave, the less it seemed to matter, and yet she continued, hoping that if she proved her worth long enough, people would finally see it. One day, she overheard a conversation that was not meant for her ears, and in that moment, she heard her own name followed by words that made her freeze. They didn't describe her as important or valuable, but as convenient. Someone who would understand, someone who would adjust, someone who would never leave. And for the first time, she realized convenience was not the same as being cherished. But just as she started questioning everything she believed, she was pulled back into the same pattern once again. She met someone who made her feel seen again, or at least that's what she thought at first. He noticed her silence and called it peace. He appreciated her effort and called it rare. And for a moment, she believed she had finally found someone who understood her value. But slowly, the pattern repeated itself in a different form. Her calls started getting shorter replies, her efforts became expected rather than appreciated, and her presence once again became something taken for granted. Still she stayed because leaving felt like admitting she was not enough. So she adjusted, as she always did, lowering her expectations instead of raising her standards. Every time she felt hurt, she convinced herself that love required patience, that maybe she just needed to try harder, be better, be quieter, be less demanding. But what she didn't realize was that she was not being loved for who she was, but tolerated for how little she required in return, and that realization was quietly waiting for the moment everything would finally break. The breaking point did not come loudly, but in a way that felt strangely calm and irreversible. One day, she made a decision to show how much she cared, expecting nothing but hoping for something, and for the first time, there was no response at all. Hours turned into a full day, and the silence became louder than any words she had ever heard. When she finally saw him, it wasn't a confrontation or an explanation, just distance, as if she had become a stranger in a story she thought she was part of. And in that moment, everything she had ignored came rushing back at once. Every overlooked effort, every dismissed feeling, every time she was made to feel like she was optional. But instead of anger, what came first was confusion, because she had spent so long believing that love was something you earned by enduring pain, not something that should feel mutual from the start. And just when she thought things couldn't get worse, she was faced with a truth she was never prepared to hear. The truth arrived in a conversation she did not initiate but could not escape. Words were spoken calmly, almost casually, but each one felt like it was removing something from her that she didn't even know she was holding on to. She was told she was good, but not enough, nice, but not necessary, present, but not important. And in that strange moment, she realized the most painful rejection is not being hated, but being treated as replaceable. Everything she had built her identity on began to collapse silently inside her, not because someone destroyed it, but because it was never built on anything solid in the first place. She remembered every time she ignored her own discomfort just to keep someone else comfortable, every time she lowered her voice so others could speak louder, every time she stayed in places she had already outgrown. And as those memories stacked inside her mind, she finally understood she had never been valuing herself the way she valued others. But just as that realization began to form into clarity, something irreversible had already begun. The change came slowly, not as revenge, not as anger, but as silence. She stopped explaining herself to people who were never trying to understand her. She stopped overgiving to places that only knew how to take. And for the first time, she began to see how much of her life had been spent trying to earn what should have been freely given: respect, care, and presence. But by the time she understood her worth, the roles in her life had already shifted too deeply to reverse. Some people had already moved on, some had already replaced her silence with someone else's voice, and some had never intended to value her at all. And in that final realization, she understood something painful but freeing at the same time. Sometimes you don't lose people because you weren't enough, but because you stayed too long in places where you had to shrink to be accepted. And as she walked away from the version of herself that accepted less than she deserved, she finally understood the lesson that had been waiting for her all along.